It's not every day you get a call from the sheriff's department about your own property, especially when that property encompasses an entire secluded valley. But then, it's not every day you encounter a homeowners association president with the territorial instincts of a wolverine and the jurisdictional understanding of a confused badger. If I'd known that buying 3,000 acres of pristine mountain wilderness would lead to a petty feud with a woman I'd soon nickname the Duchess of Dust Motes, I might have reconsidered. Or, at the very least, invested heavily in surveillance equipment from day one. My name is Arthur Jenkins, and I'm an architect, or at least I was, before I sold my firm and decided to trade blueprints for actual mountain views. My dream had always been to build a self-sustaining, eco-friendly retreat, a place where nature and design coexisted in perfect harmony. And Blackwood Valley was it. Tucked away, miles from the nearest town, accessible by a winding dirt road, it was an untouched sanctuary. I'd spent the better part of a year just exploring it, mapping out potential sites for the main lodge and a few discreet guest cabins. For the time being, I'd put up a small, rather rustic cabin for myself, more of a well-built shed, really, near a stream, a base of operations from which to plan my grand design. It had a wood stove, a comfortable bunk, and a large drafting table. Peace, quiet, and the scent of pine, that's all I wanted. Little did I know, on the very easternmost fringe of my vast domain, a new housing development, Eagle's Crest Estates, was just finishing construction, and with it came its self-appointed guardian, Brenda Milligan. You know, drop a comment below if you've ever had one of those neighbors, the kind who seems to have a PhD in everyone else's business. Where are you watching this from, by the way? I always find it fascinating to see how far these stories travel. The first inkling I had that my solitude was about to be invaded arrived not via a howling coyote or a curious bear, but through the mail, forwarded from my post office box in town. It was an offensively beige envelope, addressed to occupant, unpermitted structure, Blackwood Valley Access Road. Inside, a crisply printed letter informed me that I was in violation of several Eagle's Crest Estates HOA bylaws. It mentioned an authorized clearing of vegetation. I'd trimmed some bushes around my cabin, erection of a non-compliant outbuilding, my cabin again, and, in my personal favorite, failure to submit architectural plans for review by the Eagle's Crest Architectural Review Committee. It was signed, with a flourish that suggested a scepter rather than a pen, Brenda Milligan, President, Eagle's Crest Estates HOA. I chuckled. Clearly, a mistake. Eagle's Crest was at least 2 miles down the valley from my cabin, and, more importantly, not on my land. Their development bordered a tiny sliver of my acreage, a section I hadn't even thought about yet. I tossed the letter onto a pile of old newspapers, assuming Brenda would eventually consult a map and realize her error. My initial reaction was mild bewilderment, a shrug of the shoulders. I had deeds, surveys, a veritable mountain of paperwork proving I owned everything from the babbling brook by my cabin to the distant peaks that kissed the clouds. Surely, this was just a case of an overzealous HOA president getting her bearings wrong. Oh, how naive I was. A week later, another beige crusader arrived in my mailbox. This one was sterner. Second notice, immediate cessation of unauthorized activities. It reiterated the previous points but added a new one, improper waste disposal, citing observed campfire smoke. Apparently, my small, contained fire pit, used for cooking and the occasional evening warmth, was an environmental hazard to her pristine, new-built kingdom. The letter warned of fines and further action. This time, I didn't chuckle. Annoyance began to bubble. Brenda Milligan, it seemed, was operating under the assumption that her authority extended as far as her binoculars could see. I imagined her, perched on her executive view lot, surveying her domain and mine, deciding what was and wasn't permissible in a valley she didn't own. I decided a polite clarification was in order. I drafted a short, courteous letter, explaining that my cabin was situated on private property, well outside the jurisdiction of Eagle's Crest Estates. I included a photocopy of the relevant section of my land survey map, highlighting my property lines, and a copy of the county record showing me as the owner of the entire parcel. I sent it via registered mail, just to be sure it reached the Duchess. I even wished her well with her new community. I figured that would be the end of it. A simple misunderstanding, now cleared up. Her response, when it came a few days later, was breathtaking in its audacity. Your claims of ownership are noted, she wrote, the tone dripping with condescension even on paper. However, the documents you provided appear to be inconsistent with our community master plan. Furthermore, that structure in question remains an eyesore and negatively impacts the aesthetic harmony sought by Eagles Crest residents. We insist on its immediate removal. Failure to comply will force us to explore all available remedies. She didn't even acknowledge the map. It was as if I'd sent her a child's crayon drawing. My brief attempt at reason had clearly been interpreted as weakness. It was around this time I called Sarah Macmillan, the lawyer who had handled the Valley purchase for me. Sarah was sharp, no nonsense, and had a dry wit that I appreciated. So, I said, after explaining the situation, am I dealing with a simple case of cartographical confusion, or something more Napoleonic? Sarah laughed. Sounds like a classic case of petty tyrant syndrome, Arthur. New HOA, new president, probably drunk on the thimbleful of power. Send me copies of everything. We'll draft a slightly less polite letter. While Sarah prepared her legal masterpiece, Brenda escalated. One afternoon, returning from a supply run into town, I found a notice physically tacked to my cabin door. It was laminated. Laminated! As if to underscore its permanence and her indomitable will. This one was printed in an aggressive red font and proclaimed, "Final warning, this illegal encampment will be reported to county authorities." She must have trespassed quite a way onto my land to post it. My annoyance was now morphing into a slow burn of anger. This wasn't just about a cabin, it was about a fundamental disregard for boundaries, for ownership, for basic decency. She saw my simple dwelling, probably saw me in my work clothes clearing brush or hauling timber, and assumed I was some drifter, an easy mark. She had no idea she was poking a bear, a very patient, architecturally minded bear, but a bear nonetheless. Old Tom Hemlock, who ran the feed store in town and had lived in the area his entire 70-odd years, was another source of local wisdom. I'd gotten to know him a bit, buying supplies and listening to his stories. When I mentioned the Eagles Crest HOA, he snorted. "That bunch," he said, leaning on the counter. "Heard they're a bit high-strung. That Milligan woman, especially. Think she bought the whole mountain, not just a patch of dirt with a prefab house on it. Some folks in town are already grumbling about her trying to tell people on the county road how fast they can drive past her precious entrance." Tom's words confirmed my suspicion. Brenda was underestimating me, seeing not the owner of a vast estate, but a convenient target for her power trip. The critical incident, the line in the sand that Brenda so spectacularly pole-vaulted over, came on a crisp autumn morning. I was enjoying a cup of coffee on my small porch, watching the mist rise from the valley floor, when I heard the unmistakable sound of vehicles approaching on my private access road. Not one, but two. A moment later, a county sheriff's cruiser, followed by a local code enforcement truck, crunched to a halt in the clearing by my cabin. Two deputies and a stern-looking woman in a county jacket emerged. One of the deputies, a young man who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else, approached me. "Morning, sir," he said, a little hesitantly. "We've had a report, about an unpermitted dwelling and possible squatter activity on this land." My blood pressure, which had been enjoying the tranquil mountain air, spiked. "Squatter?" My jaw tightened. "A report from whom, deputy?" I asked, keeping my voice level with an effort. "A Miss Brenda Milligan, president of the Eagles Crest HOA," he replied, consulting his notepad. "Claims this structure is illegal and on land adjacent to or part of their protected greenbelt." This was it. She'd actually done it. She'd called the authorities, wasting their time and mine, and publicly accused me of being a trespasser on my own land. The sheer, unmitigated gall of it was astounding. The amusement was long gone, replaced by a cold, hard resolve. The polite architect was officially on vacation. It was time for Arthur Jenkins, landowner and meticulous planner, to take charge. I invited the officers and the code enforcement official, Ms. Albright, into my cabin, which, while rustic, was impeccably clean and organized. On my large drafting table, I unrolled the master survey plat of Blackwood Valley. It was an impressive document, several feet long, showing every contour line, every stream, every boundary marker of my 3,000 acres. "Gentlemen, Ms. Albright," I began, my voice calm but firm, "this is a survey of my property, purchased by me 18 months ago. The deed is recorded with the county, as is this plat. As you can see," I pointed with a pencil, "Eagle's Crest Estates is located here, on the far eastern edge. My cabin," another point, "is located approximately 2¼ miles inside my property line, and nowhere near their development or any alleged greenbelt they might claim." I then produce my driver's license, the notarized deed, and my latest property tax bill, paid in full. Ms. Albright, the code enforcement officer, looked over the documents carefully. The deputies exchanged a glance. "Well, Mr. Jenkins," Ms. Albright said, finally, a slight smile playing on her lips. "It appears your paperwork is very much in order. This cabin is well within your property boundaries. As for permits, given its size and nature as a temporary structure on such a large private parcel, it falls well within acceptable county guidelines for an owner's personal use during development of their land. In short, there's no violation here." The younger deputy looked relieved. The older one just nodded, a knowing look in his eyes. "Seems like a false alarm, then," he said. "Sorry to have bothered you, Mr. Jenkins." "Not at all, officers, Ms. Albright," I replied. "Thank you for your professionalism. I understand you have to follow up on reports. However, Ms. Milligan has been repeatedly informed of these facts and has chosen to ignore them, escalating to harassment and now, apparently, filing false reports. I trust this will be noted." Ms. Albright made a note on her clipboard. "It will be, Mr. Jenkins. It will be." As they drove away, a new kind of determination settled in me. Brenda Milligan had crossed a line from annoying busybody to a genuine menace. This wasn't just about property rights anymore, it was about stopping a bully who used falsehoods and intimidation as her primary tools. My strategy shifted from polite clarification to active, decisive defense. The first step was to get Sarah fully engaged. I recounted the visit from the sheriff. Filing a false report. Sarah whistled. "She's playing with fire. Okay, Arthur, gloves are off. We're sending a cease and desist that will make her hair curl. We'll demand a written apology to you and a retraction sent to the Sheriff's Department and County Code Enforcement for the false report. We'll also put her on notice for trespass and defamation. This isn't a game anymore." Next, I called my surveyor, a meticulous professional named Gary. "Gary," I said, "I need those property lines along the eastern boundary, the one that abuts Eagle's Crest, marked. And I don't mean subtly. I want stakes, bright flagging tape, the works. I want it to look like a runway from space." Gary chuckled. "Having some neighbor trouble, Arthur? You could say that. Let's just say I want to provide a very clear visual aid for the geographically challenged." While Gary prepared to make my boundary unmissable, I gathered all of Brenda's letters, her laminated notice, and made detailed notes of every interaction, including the visit from the deputies. Documentation, as any architect knows, is key. I also, on Sarah's advice, ordered a couple of high-quality, motion-activated trail cameras. "Just in case Ms. Milligan decides to personally inspect your new survey markers," Sarah had said dryly. Tom Hemlock proved to be a useful, if informal, ally. When I told him about the deputies, he shook his head. "That woman's got more brass than a Salvation Army band. Sheriff Miller isn't gonna be too pleased about his resources being wasted. He's a good man, but he doesn't suffer fools gladly, especially meddling ones." Tom also mentioned that a couple of other Eagle's Crest residents had quietly complained to him about Brenda's overreach within their own HOA, fining people for having the wrong shade of garden gnome or parking their car an inch too far to the left in their own driveways. It seemed Brenda's tyranny wasn't limited to just me. This information was interesting. It suggested she might not have the unified support she projected. Within a week, Sarah's cease and desist letter, a formidable document citing various statutes and potential legal ramifications, was delivered to Brenda Milligan via courier, requiring a signature. Simultaneously, Gary and his crew descended on the eastern boundary. They drove in heavy wooden stakes every 20 feet, each topped with a blaze orange cap and festooned with fluorescent pink flagging tape that fluttered energetically in the slightest breeze. It was, if I may say so myself, a glorious line of demarcation. You couldn't miss it if you were legally blind and trying. To further underscore my presence and legitimate activity, I hired a local crew to begin clearing brush along a section of my property near the newly marked boundary, well within my rights and according to a sustainable forestry plan I was developing. It was for a future firebreak and a nature trail, but the site of activity, a small bulldozer, men with chainsaws, all clearly on my side of the vibrant pink line, must have been quite the spectacle for anyone observing from Eagle's Crest. Brenda's reaction was not one of quiet contemplation or dawning realization. It was, predictably, explosive. She didn't respond directly to Sarah's letter, at least not initially. Instead, she apparently called an emergency meeting of the Eagle's Crest HOA. According to a rather disgruntled Eagle's Crest resident who secretly called Sarah a few days later, let's call him Mr. Henderson, a retired accountant who just wanted to enjoy his retirement in peace, Brenda had delivered a fiery speech. She'd painted me as a hostile and aggressive developer intent on destroying their pastoral views and flouting all community standards. She waved my polite initial letter, not Sarah's, notably. As proof of my deceptive nature, she demanded the HOA allocate funds for legal action against me. She's completely unhinged, Mr. Henderson told Sarah. Some of us tried to ask questions, you know, like, does he actually own the land, and are we sure we have any say over what he does way up there? She just shouted us down, said we were being disloyal to the community. She even accused me of being in cahoots with you, Arthur. He sounded genuinely distressed. Most of us just want a quiet life, not a war with a neighbor who, frankly, seems to own everything around us. This was gold. Brenda was alienating her own people. Then came Brenda's next move, a testament to her spectacular lack of judgment. One afternoon, one of my newly installed trail cameras captured crystal clear footage. There was Brenda Milligan, resplendent in a lime green tracksuit, marching purposefully up to one of Gary's bright orange survey stakes. She looked left, looked right, then grabbed the stake with both hands and, with a grunt, yanked it out of the ground. She then proceeded to tear off the flagging tape and throw the stake into the bushes on her side of the line. She did this to 3 more stakes before, presumably, tiring of her vandalism. The camera caught it all, including a clear shot of her face, contorted in a mask of petty fury. Well, 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 Sarah said, glee evident in her voice when I sent her the video file. Miss Milligan, it appears, is also a budding criminal. Destruction of survey markers is a misdemeanor in this state, sometimes a felony depending on context. And this is prime evidence of her continued harassment and bad faith. This is beautiful, Arthur. Absolutely beautiful. The plan now shifted from defense to a more proactive stance. Sarah drafted another letter, this one even more severe, including a copy of a still image from the video showing Brenda mid-vandalism. It informed her that we had her on camera destroying survey markers, a criminal offense, and that unless she immediately ceased all hostile actions, provided the written apology, and paid for the replacement of the damaged markers, we would not only proceed with the civil suit but also furnish the video to the sheriff's department with a formal criminal complaint. Brenda must have realized she'd finally, truly, overstepped. Or perhaps her own HOA's lawyer, if they had one, advised her that lime green tracksuits do not grant immunity from property law. Because her next move was not another letter, but another call to the sheriff. This time, however, her complaint was even more outlandish. She claimed I was conducting threatening surveillance of her property and that my workmen were making menacing gestures. This was the showdown I'd been anticipating, though perhaps not in this exact form. When the familiar sheriff's cruiser, this time with Sheriff Miller himself at the wheel, and a second deputy, pulled up to my cabin, I was ready. Sarah had driven up earlier, just in case, she'd said with a knowing smile. Sheriff Miller, a tall, weathered man with intelligent eyes, greeted me. Mr. Jenkins. Miss Milligan's on the horn again. Something about you menacing her with property development. He didn't look particularly impressed with the complaint. Sheriff Miller, good to see you again, though I wish it were under better circumstances, I said. This is my attorney, Sarah Macmillan. Perhaps we can clear this up once and for all. We invited him inside. Brenda, we learned, was waiting at the edge of her property, near the now famous boundary line, presumably expecting to witness my arrest or at least a stern lecture. Sarah laid it all out for the sheriff, the initial polite letters, Brenda's dismissive responses, the first police visit, our formal cease and desist, the clearly marked boundary, the legitimate work being done on my land, and then, the pièce de résistance, the video of Brenda destroying the survey markers. Sheriff Miller watched the video on Sarah's laptop, his expression unchanging, but I saw his jaw tighten slightly. When it finished, he looked up. Destruction of survey markers. That's unambiguous. Indeed, Sarah said. And her current complaint about threatening surveillance seems rather ironic, given this footage was captured by a camera on Mr. Jenkins' own property, pointed at his own property line, which Ms. Milligan illegally crossed to commit said vandalism. The sheriff nodded slowly. Mr. Jenkins, Ms. Macmillan, I believe I have a clear picture now. Would you accompany me to speak with Ms. Milligan? I think it's time she understood the full legal ramifications of her actions. The walk to the boundary line was, for me, one of quiet satisfaction. Brenda was there, arms crossed, tapping her foot impatiently. She had a couple of other HOA members with her, looking uncomfortable. Mr. Henderson was not among them. When she saw me, Sarah, and the sheriff approaching, a triumphant smirk started to form on her face, but it faltered when she saw the sheriff's stony expression. Brenda Milligan. Sheriff Miller asked, his voice calm but carrying undeniable authority. Yes, Sheriff. Finally. Are you going to do something about this man's outrageous behavior? He's filming us. His workers are practically on our land, making rude gestures, she declared, pointing an accusatory finger at me. The sheriff began, Mr. Jenkins is conducting lawful work on his own property, which is clearly marked. As for filming, the only footage I'm concerned about right now is footage showing you, on Mr. Jenkins' property, willfully destroying legally placed survey markers. Brenda's face went from puce to pale in record time. I don't know what you're talking about. That's a lie. He's trying to trick you. Sarah stepped forward. Ms. Milligan, we have time-stamped, high-definition video of you removing and damaging for survey stakes. We also have your previous letters, your trespass to post notices, and a record of your false report to code enforcement and the sheriff's department. Mr. Jenkins has shown remarkable patience, but that patience has run out. The sheriff continued, Ms. Milligan, filing false police reports is a serious offense. Destruction of property and trespass are also serious. I am giving you a formal warning. If we receive one more unsubstantiated complaint from you regarding Mr. Jenkins or his property, or if there is any further interference with his lawful enjoyment of his land, you will be facing charges. Is that clear? Brenda sputtered, but our HOA rules. The aesthetic integrity. The greenbelt. Sheriff Miller said, his voice dropping a decibel, becoming even more steely. Your HOA rules apply to your HOA. They do not apply to Mr. Jenkins. They do not apply to the 3,000 acres of Blackwood Valley that he owns. Your greenbelt, if it even exists as you describe it, is not being impacted by a cabin 2 miles inside his own land. You have been harassing this man, you have vandalized his property, and you have wasted considerable county resources. This stops now. The 2 HOA members with Brenda suddenly found the tips of their shoes intensely interesting. One of them muttered something about needing to check on a sprinkler and began to sidle away. Brenda looked like a deflating balloon. Her bluster, her self-importance, all of it seemed to leak out of her, leaving behind a confused, suddenly small-looking woman in a lime green tracksuit. Sarah then delivered the final blow. Ms. Milligan, you will receive a bill for the replacement of the survey markers. We still expect a written apology to Mr. Jenkins and retraction sent to the relevant county departments for your false reports. Failure to comply within 7 days will result in a civil lawsuit for harassment, defamation, and damages. We have an exceptionally strong case." Brenda opened her mouth, then closed it. For the first time since this whole saga began, she was utterly silent. The Duchess had been dethroned, not by an invading army, but by facts, property lines, and a well-placed trail camera. In the immediate aftermath, a stunned silence descended upon the Eagle's Crest Estate's border. Brenda, without another word, turned and walked stiffly back towards her house, her two remaining acolytes trailing uncertainly behind her. Sheriff Miller gave me a curt nod. "Shouldn't be hearing from her again on this matter, Mr. Jenkins. But if you do, you call me directly." And just like that, it was over. The very next day, a courier delivered a grudging, terse, but legally sufficient, apology to my cabin. It was typed, not even signed with her customary flourish. Letters of retraction, equally brief, were confirmed by Sarah to have been received by the Sheriff's Department and Code Enforcement. A check for the exact amount to cover the cost of the 4 survey stakes and Gary's time to replace them arrived a day later. Peace, glorious peace, returned to Blackwood Valley. The fluorescent pink line of my property boundary remained unmolested. The brush clearing continued without incident. My little cabin felt more like a sanctuary than ever before. I even decided to put up a fence along that particular stretch of boundary, a very nice, aesthetically pleasing split-rail fence, but a definite, undeniable fence nonetheless. A silent testament to the battle won. Looking back, it's almost comical. This woman, ruler of her tiny patch of suburban aspiration, genuinely believed she could dictate terms to the owner of an entire mountain valley. It's a peculiar kind of arrogance, isn't it? The kind that blooms in the fertile ground of petty power. What did she think was going to happen? That I'd just pack up my cabin and flee because she cited Bylaw 7, subsection C, regarding unapproved rustic aesthetics? The absurdity of it all still makes me chuckle. The story, of course, got around the small town. Tom Hemlock was particularly delighted, regaling his customers with the tale of Brenda versus the Mountain Man, as he took to calling me. I wasn't a mountain man, just an architect who valued his privacy and his property rights, but I suppose it made for a better story. Even Mr. Henderson, the disgruntled HOA resident, called Sarah to express his relief, mentioning that the subsequent Eagle's Crest HOA meeting had been far more subdued and that Brenda Milligan was keeping a remarkably low profile. There was even talk of a motion to review her presidency. Now, I can finally focus on my original plan, designing and building my eco-retreat. The valley is quiet again, save for the wind in the pines and the sound of the stream. And every now and then, as I look out over my land, my domain, I spare a thought for Brenda. I almost feel a sliver of, no, not pity, more like bemusement. She had her little kingdom, and she tried to expand its borders with nothing but bluster and a belief in her own infallibility. She learned the hard way that some property lines are best left respected, especially when the person on the other side owns the whole darn map. Perhaps there's a lesson in there for all the petty tyrants out there. Know your boundaries, both literally and figuratively. And maybe, just maybe, check who owns the valley before you declare war on a cabin. This is Arthur Jenkins, the man who accidentally became a local legend, signing off from a very peaceful Blackwood Valley.